These are the most underrated types of books that exist. Novels get a lot of attention. Full-length nonfiction is praised widely. Memoirs make the news. But this right here is the literary dark horse. These are essay collections, and they can change your life, and I've got a bunch of recommendations for you. I love essay collections because they're high octane and they offer a lot of variety. Many works of full-length nonfiction should have been an essay, but the author needed to hit a word count minimum with the publisher and therefore stretches an idea over 200 pages that should have been a 20-page, highly concentrated essay. I love the variety. I love the literary beauty that's injected in an essay collection. I've read a bunch of them, so here's some recommendations, as well as some that you might want to avoid. First up, Jonathan Franzen has written a couple. This is The End of the Earth, as well as How to Be Alone. You can kind of forget The End of the Earth. I don't think it's great. Seems very niche, and I'm actually surprised at some of the content in here. It feels like he stepped beyond the scope of a normal literary figure in some of his writing here, and it doesn't feel like it'll age all that well, although there's an essay in here on William T. Vollmann that I thought was really good and funny. How to Be Alone is excellent. I've talked about this before. In this collection, he has an essay called Mr. Difficult that is one of my favorites of all time. So if you're going to check out Franzen's essays, How to Be Alone is a good place to start. This is Calvino's The Written World and the Unwritten World. I have not read enough of these essays. I've gotten started, but I really look forward to finishing. This is one of those essay collections that I'll likely just read cover to cover and really devour the whole thing. Some collections are kind of like a sampler. You just pick and choose as you go. This is one I think I'll devour cover to cover. He was so creative, had such a good understanding, not just of the craft of writing, but also he understood books from a reader's perspective. What I've read I love so far. Looking forward to more Calvino. Serious Noticing by James Wood. This is a collection of literary criticism. These essays I've gone through, not entirely, but I've read a good chunk of James Wood's work. And I gotta say, I think he leaves much to be desired, considering the fact that he almost exclusively does literary criticism as the main thrust of his project. I'm surprised at the lack of really sharp and interesting observation. Harold Bloom did not like James Wood, and I love Harold Bloom, but I'm also not eternally faithful to Harold Bloom. In this case, I kind of have to agree with Bloom. I'm not exactly sure why James Wood is on the map. If you have an essay or a piece of criticism from him that really struck you as good, please let me know. I want to read more. I've enjoyed his stuff. I just read it and it feels honestly a little bit like a lay critic. And I tend to think that people who are primarily authors like Updike or David Foster Wallace are often presenting better criticism than James Wood, who's primarily a critic. So again, I'm willing to have my mind changed, but so far I'm not drooling over the work of James Wood. Here's a personal favorite. I've been introduced to the nonfiction of David Foster Wallace. This is both Flesh and Not. This one I'm not as far as I should be in, but it's been very, very good so far. He's got a famous essay on Roger Federer in here. I love the intersection of sports and literary fiction, and David Foster Wallace tackles it really well in this. This right here, A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again, is one of my favorite works of nonfiction ever. Within this binding, you have several essays from David Foster Wallace, but the title, A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again, is basically a full-length work of nonfiction, a really, really long essay where he documents his time on a cruise. I laughed out loud endlessly over that essay. It was so creative, well written. The footnotes, which you'd think would be a distraction and kind of annoying, were actually a great sense of relief. I loved reading the footnotes. They were so funny. There was little Easter eggs laced throughout them. David Foster Wallace has really impressed me with his nonfiction. I've now read, I think, the overwhelming majority of his nonfiction and short stories, and soon I'll be tackling his novels as well. But this collection right here, if you needed to start with David Foster Wallace, begin here. You'll be glad you did. A Paper Orchestra, I actually discovered this because the author, Michael Jamin, not sure, is on TikTok. These are real life stories / essays that he's put together over the course of a career that he's built for himself. And as a writer, he has written for some of my favorite television shows that I devoured growing up. And these are really funny. They're not cloying, but they're definitely sweet at times. And there's heart and sincerity inside of his essays, as well as a ton of humor. So support a TikToker and pick up this book. You can't do a video on essay collections without mentioning Joan Didion, Slouching Towards Bethlehem. I've talked about this before. She combines absolute literary beauty with such skill in observation, great variety. She's a journalist. She's been equipped with an eye for observation and a knack for vocabulary, a craft that she has so honed over the course of a long career on page. Joan Didion's wonderful. Check out the White Album as well. Check out Let Me Tell You What I Mean. She's got several collections, but you won't be sorry if you dive into the world of Joan Didion. This is kind of an obscure essay collection I picked up from Tennessee Williams. He's mostly a playwright, but I did enjoy his essays, his observations. They're almost like journal entries. I splash around in reading some of his plays. What was the one, Cat on a Tin Roof or something like that? But I'm not a big play guy. My first job was at a playhouse, working in a theater, tearing tickets and selling concessions, doing mental math, and I would watch the shows over and over and over again. So I kind of got burnt out on musicals and plays when I was in high school. So I haven't really revisited them. I'm not a big reader of plays, whether it's Williams or Chekhov or others. I've dove into them a bit, but I do appreciate their greatness. And because of that, I dove into the world of Tennessee Williams with this essay collection called Where I Live, which was quite good. And frankly, probably required reading if you have any interest in building a life in theater. If I was stranded on an island and could only take one collection of literary criticism with me, Dorothy Parker would be a contender, and she'd be high on the list. This is her collected works. Her essays are a great mixture of wit and just intelligent observation. She kind of gives you an understanding as to why certain authors, why certain pieces of fiction really work. And she's just brutally honest. Dorothy Parker is a hero in the world of literary fiction and criticism. Finally, a personal favorite of mine, Andre Dubus. This is his collection, Meditations from a Movable Chair, and Nod to Hemingway, as well as Broken Vessels. Both of these are similar, and both of them are extremely good. He's mostly hailed as a great short story writer in the sort of 70s and 80s and 90s era of a short story renaissance with the likes of Tobias Wolff and George Saunders and Gina Berrialt, Raymond Carver, Dennis Johnson. And no doubt he's earned his place as a legendary figure amongst short story writers, but his essays are fabulous. They're full of heart, sincerity, honesty. They contain literary beauty. He's very vulnerable in his pain of he was trying to save someone, ended up in a wheelchair. It's a whole story he gets into here. But he's very real with his pain, with the dysfunction of family, his wrestling match as a father, and his personal life and his time as a writer, trying to earn money, trying to eke out a living. Well, at the same time, somehow, despite this being often mundane or dark and dreary, there remains a glimmer of hope within the work of Andre Dubus that I think is absolutely gorgeous. So in all, I actually think essay collections have a certain endurance and have the capacity to last, more so than standard nonfiction. Reason being, a book called How to Be More Efficient at Work may provide some good insight and may be a decent read for you, but it's likely not written by a philosopher, by a thought leader, by someone whose words are going to be read 200 years from now. When I think about the works of Plato and Aristotle, even fast forwarding to Pascal in the 1600s, their works were often fragments, essays, pieces of thinking that had a lot of variety, that sometimes were obscure, sometimes demanded rereading. But within these essays and these collections, we find truths that are high octane and rich that we can live on and build on and discuss and chew on. And I'm afraid that nonfiction in the world of it has become so commercial that we're interested in catchy titles and how-tos that really feed our ego and feed our narcissism as a species. And I find that essays provide something much needed, which is not a promise to give you all of the answers, but some ideas and insights that allow you to sort of finish the book, to finish the piece and work it out in your own life. If you haven't made room in your TBR for an essay collection, these are just some. I've got more on the shelf I can present to you, but I strongly encourage you to enter this world, because once you do, you'll probably be a lifelong reader and admirer of essay collections.